The Phantom Archives of Edgar the Architect, and Schale by Gen Kagami. Volume 11. Leça de Palmeira, the Atlantic Boundary. The Brine of Leça. Untethered from the concept of time, the genius architect Edgar and the pearl-haired youth Schale wander through eternity, retaining their youthful, exquisite forms. Across eras, they traverse the world's renowned architectural works and the maddening constructs Edgar himself once assembled. This is a tranquil, decadent journey through phantom architecture, dissecting space, light, gravity, and the anomalies lurking within through cold, unflinching logic. 1. Atlantic light and the porcelain frame. A suffocating scent of brine and the almost violent radiance of the Atlantic. Leça de Palmeira, northern Portugal. Amidst the rugged, rocky terrain, the fresh concrete lines drawn by a young architect shimmered with a blinding intensity, reflecting the fierce summer sun. It was a summer where a certain optimistic air of a bygone era drifted within the colours and silhouettes of the bathers' attire. Down a brand new concrete ramp leading from the scorching asphalt road toward the shore, two young men descended in silence. Even beneath the relentless southern European sun, Edgar showed not a single mote of disarray in his appearance. Directly against his skin, he wore a high-gauge, short-sleeved knit, woven from a blend of the finest summer woolen silk, combed to extreme fineness. Depending on the angle of the light, threads of a dark navy with a hint of blue and cold charcoal interwove with obsessive density, presenting an overall hue of a bottomless dark purple, like the midnight abyss of the sea. His perfectly creased raw linen trousers and the slender loafers on his feet severed his silhouette, that of a mature, chilling youth, frozen in eternity, utterly from the surrounding clamour. Following slightly behind with a languid stride was Schale. He too possessed the frame of a beautiful youth, precarious yet perfected, a fitting companion to Edgar. His body was enveloped in a thin, open-collar shirt. Its warp was of pure white silk with a mother-of-pearl lustre, and its weft was of an extremely fine, pale grey linen. Whenever it caught the breeze, the two coloured threads overlapped to emit a ghostly sheen of pearl grey akin to morning mist or bone ash, vividly revealing the wax-white lines of his slender shoulders. Two beautiful youths who would never age. Their footsteps echoed quietly upon the pristine concrete, not yet eroded by the sea breeze. The roar of the waves is immense, yet the sea remains entirely hidden. It feels as though we are being teased. Schale narrowed his eyes, shielding them with long fingers emerging from his pearl-grey cuffs. That is the architect's method, Edgar replied without looking back, his voice quiet yet definitive, dominating the space. He erects concrete walls to sever the view between the road and the ocean. He forces a profound awareness of the sea through sound and scent alone, while robbing us of the visual. Come, we shall pass through the womb now. 2. Darkness of the corridor and the released rocks. As Edgar had predicted, once they reached the bottom of the ramp, they stepped into a dark corridor sheltered by a low concrete roof, a narrow space lined with changing rooms and showers. After the brilliance of the south, their vision was abruptly shuttered by darkness. The air of the chilled shade, the scent of wet tiles, chlorine and intense brine, the presence of raw, living flesh saturated the space between the walls. It was the moment they emerged from that dim, compressed conduit. Crack! The horizon of the vast Atlantic and the violent sunlight exploded into their vision. Their pupils, which had contracted to their limit in the darkness, shrieked at the overwhelming torrent of light and colour. Ah! Schale instinctively narrowed his eyes, shielding his face with the sleeve of his pearl-grey shirt. Spreading below them was a gargantuan seaside pool, constructed by utilising the raw, natural rock formations and allowing only low concrete lines to crawl geometrically across them. This was the birth of Alvaro Caesar's masterpiece, the Leça swimming pool. Natural stone and man-made concrete intermingled as if melting their boundaries, and upon the water's surface crowded a throng of multicoloured bathers enjoying the fresh holiday resort. Cheers, the thunder of breaking waves and the scent of sun-baked wet skin. It was a suffocating fever of life. A dramatic liberation following visual deprivation, and the taming of savage nature into a human scale with a single line of concrete. A magnificent purposefulness. Edgar crossed his arms over his dark purple knit and looked down chillily at the frenzy below. Within his jet-black eyes there was no interest in the jubilant humans. He saw only the perfection of the lines that composed the space. However, this overwhelming heat is somewhat off-putting. Come, Schale, let us take refuge in the neighbouring restaurant before we are overwhelmed by the crowd. 3. Rising steps and the overlapping horizon. To escape the immense clamour of the pool, the two headed toward the adjacent Boa Nova tea house. However, Caesar's architecture does not simply invite a guest inside. To reach the entrance of the restaurant from the low rocky path, one had to ascend an external staircase built of whitewashed walls and stone. We are heading to a seaside restaurant, yet we are climbing. Schale ascended the dry stone steps one by one, allowing the hem of his pearl-grey shirt to play in the sea breeze. An ascending circulation built toward the sea. Looking up, the southern European sky stretched infinitely high. But the white walls and rock faces on either side narrowed the field of vision. The full expanse of the Atlantic remained hidden. Only the roar of the surf and the scent of brine stubbornly announced the ocean's proximity. This, too, is the perfect control of space. Edgar's deep, dark purple loafers stepped firmly upon the stone. This ascent thoroughly teases the human desire to see the ocean. And look at that landing. At the moment Schale reached the top of the stairs, an unbelievable sight appeared. The straight line of the landing step and the horizon of the Atlantic stretching beyond it overlapped with absolute precision, becoming one. Oh! The moment when a geometric line crafted by man becomes perfectly assimilated with nature's horizon. Caesar calculated this miraculous optical illusion to the finest degree to determine the angle and height of these stairs. Edgar traced that perfect line with a chilled yet clearly admiring gaze, and immediately after savouring that exquisite appetizer of overlapping horizons, the two passed through the heavy wooden door of the entrance. There the environment inverted into a dim, narrow, descending indoor staircase, enveloped in the heavy grain of African Aphelia wood. Utterly severed from the glare outside, they descended as if diving into the sea, and in the dining room that followed, beneath a ceiling pressed low, the Atlantic horizon, framed like a panoramic painting, was suddenly and violently released. 4. Green wine and the grain of the tide. An exquisite compression and release of space. The frenzy outside feels like a lie. Edgar sat by the window facing the sea, murmuring quietly. His summer wool knit, which maintained its bottomless dark purple even in the southern light, sank into the polished black wooden chair. Opposite him, Schale, in his thin pearl-grey linen shirt, stared vacantly at the white caps of the Atlantic through the glass. Before long, a waiter brought well-chilled Vino Verde green wine and a marinade of fresh seafood. The pale gold, slightly effervescent liquid hissed and popped with tiny bubbles in the glass held by Edgar's long fingers. Edgar, is it just me, or is the wood grain above moving? Schale looked up, a hint of doubt in his voice as he was about to take a sip. Above them, the Afzelia wood panelling of the ceiling pressed down low and heavy. Its reddish-brown grain had begun to describe strange, undulating ripples, as if synchronized with the sea outside. V. Geometry shedding reason. Creak. Groan. The raw sound of wood groaning began to echo through the serene restaurant. Edgar placed his glass on the table and quietly watched the ceiling, which appeared to be undulating and gradually descending, with his cold, jet-black eyes. To force the space toward the horizon, the ceiling was suppressed to its absolute limit. That mechanical stress and the energy of the raging sea outside are causing a short circuit within the skeleton of this young architecture. A self-derisive smile, tinged with a hint of hedonistic pleasure, flickered at the corner of Edgar's mouth. No, at this stage, Scissor himself surely hasn't realized the magnificence of the ceiling, Edgar stated definitively. Unlike floors or walls, a ceiling, which acts as a lid over the human head, can, at times, cause an illusion of gravity itself, directly amplifying the madness of a space. The unconscious runaway energy of Scissor's youth before he became possessed by its terror and beauty in later years was now manifesting here as an anomaly. Schale, it is coming. Edgar spoke in a voice that was low yet vibrated through the space. Geometry has shed its reason. The moment those words fell, the thick wooden ceiling above began to heave violently. The wood grains swirled, and the perspective of their vision was utterly warped. Beams that should have intersected at right angles bent pliantly. The entire space began to contract and expand like the stomach of a gargantuan sea creature attempting to swallow them whole. Yet, Edgar did not move. He did not even issue an arrogant declaration to subdue the space. He merely leaned back deep into his chair, arms crossed, looking up chillily at the raging waves of wood grain as if watching a supreme performance. The pure energy of space is simply spilling over, exceeding the young architect's intent. We need only receive it. Showing not a mote of fear, Edgar quietly drained the effervescent Vino Verde down his throat. Schale too followed Edgar's lead, holding his breath and continuing to watch the undulating ceiling. Finally, at the moment, a particularly large wave struck the rocks outside and white spray lashed against the window. The frenzy of the ceiling subsided, as if it had been a lie, the heat of the space receding. The wood grain regained its straight lines, the beams intersected correctly at right angles, and the environment returned to its heavy, serene form of architecture. It's over. Schale let out a long, slow breath. The dining room was as silent as if nothing had happened. Edgar placed his empty glass on the table and returned his gaze to the horizon outside, looking satisfied. Yes, it was the beautiful sleep-talking of a young genius. The 6. Sculpture of the Sea Breeze. The finish, named Time. Leaving the Boanova tea house after the phantom of the undulating wood grain had vanished, the sun had already begun to set, and the Atlantic wind had cooled slightly. Amidst the intense orange light dyeing the sea and sky, the two began to walk slowly along the path tracing the rocks. Schale's pearl-grey linen shirt caught the sea breeze, billowing softly. Walking beside him, Edgar's dark purple summer wool absorbed the twilight glow, appearing even deeper in hue sharply bordering his cold, statue-like silhouette. That was delicious, but a terribly exhausting lunch. You told me to receive it, and I nearly got seasick from the waves, Schale grumbled while stretching his limbs. Edgar gave a thin smile and used his long fingers to lightly press down his jet-black fringe, which was about to be mussed by the wind. Exceptional spaces at times directly stroke the human nerves, but it seems the raw madness of the young Caesar ends here. Look, there stands an architecture built upon an entirely different logic. Edgar directed his gaze toward a small white building standing alone atop a jagged rock face. The Boa Nova Chapel, once part of a monastery. Its exterior walls, coated in pure white stucco, had been carved by centuries of salt-laden Atlantic gales. The plaster had peeled away in places, revealing the rugged stone beneath. The small cross atop the roof tilted slightly, bearing the scars of the merciless violence known as weathering across its entire form. It's quite dilapidated. Compared to Caesar's linear concrete, it looks like a toy shack. It may look that way to you, but that is another truth of architecture. Edgar stopped and stared at the small chapel standing beyond the sea spray, with eyes that were quiet and profoundly transparent. Young Caesar sought to carve out the violence of nature with human intellect by drawing robust concrete lines. But that little chapel is different. It abandoned the fight against nature and chose simply to be. And what do you think happened as a result? Edgar pointed to the whitewashed walls that had been perpetually exposed to the sea breeze. Unimaginable years, the salt and wind from the sea, they have carved the corners of that building, stripped the stucco, and utterly assimilated it with the surrounding rocks. Upon the stone box assembled by man, a merciless carpenter named Time has applied the final finish, the patina. In his definitive voice, there was a tinge of quiet respect, distinct from his evaluation of the young genius. From the moment an architecture rises from a blueprint, it begins to walk toward death, toward deterioration. Yet, that process of weathering toward death is precisely what promises a true depth to the space and its indigeneity to the landscape. The beauty of an architecture finished by time is something no genius's geometry can rival. 7. Twilight of those without clocks. Edgar's words were swallowed by the thunder of the breaking waves. Schale narrowed his eyes against the wind, a slightly sorrowful smile playing upon his lips. Time applies the final finish, does it? That is something we can never possess. Schale's wax-white fingertips touched the chest of his pearl-grey shirt. Their flesh would never weather. Not a single wrinkle would be etched upon them. They were beings rejected by the finish named time. Terribly perfect, yet eternally incomplete. Indeed, we are nothing more than old, unbuilt plans, frozen forever upon a blueprint. Edgar's quiet affirmation. He took a deep breath and turned his face toward the Atlantic horizon, which was beginning to glow red with the setting sun. His dark purple knit, woven of extremely fine threads, billowed slightly with the movement of his deathless chest. But because of that, we are able to accurately measure the beauty of their decay. This cruel privilege is the only entertainment permitted to us. Come, the sun is setting. Let us return to the city before the sea breeze grows too cold. The shadows of the two stretched long and incredibly dark across the rugged Portuguese rocks. Between the brand new concrete and the weathered white chapel, amidst the falling twilight, the two young men, who would never age, walked away quietly, without a sound. End of Volume 11.